Two friends meet up to drink some beers and talk about past times. Not yesterday, but long ago, it's scandals, wars and crimes. From Stalin's reign to Prohibition, Tudors, Pompey, Bush and NASA's mission, Edison's Bulk, Genghis Khan's rise to victory. Forget your old teacher, it's time for Pint-Sized History.
Hello, I'm Joe.
And I'm Zack.
And welcome to Pint-Sized History, where we look through the landmark events that shape the modern world we live in, and with a refreshing beverage.
Cheers.
Each week, one of us plays the expert and one of us plays the, proxy person that doesn't know too much about what's going on. Last week, I was the expert that researched the topic, which was D-Day. I'm not doing that this time. It's now Zack that's going to do it.
You're in my capable hands now, and the topic is Stalingrad. Let's just stress that we're not experts in any way, shape or form. We're not historians. We're not lifelong researchers. We are just enthusiasts. We love history deeply.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gets me hard.
Excuse me?
Sorry.
We love it so much that we want to be able to talk about it in a chill format with, a drink in hand and just to go over the interesting stuff that happened. We have complete respect for and admiration, really, for everyone that was involved in these conflicts because they are just so obscenely insane to think about. We can't process how it must have been like at the time, so we don't try to. We're just there to talk about the interesting facts, the stories, and get through it from there.
And let me tell you, Stalingrad is fucking harrowing. Like, it is nightmare fuel. I was, when I was doing my research, Joe, I was trying to find a nice, happy story to, kind of put within all the horror and dread and kind of just disgusting nature of what the battle was like. There aren't any. There are none. There's no happiness in Stalingrad. So let that set the tone of what we'll be looking at today.
Oh, well, even if it's super harrowing and by the end of this podcast I feel really, really sad, I'm still looking forward to it because I from my personal perspective, I know pretty much very little about Stalingrad. I know the main beats of it. I know what happens. But all I really get is just how brutal. I don't know the stories. I don't know the individual tales. And the numbers. I mean, I'm sure you'll get into the numbers. But unbelievable the scale of how big this battle was and how long it took.
So I guess before we jump in, this is called Pint-Sized History because we have a delicious beverage during the podcast. And today I'll be drinking... I was trying to look for a Russian beer, but I've gone somewhere close. Japan, which sort of at this time in World War II actually borders Russia. Vladivostok, and it kind of that's part of where Manchuria is.
That's true. Imperial Japan had invaded Eastern Asia at this point, to the point where they were next to Russia. Having said that, though, they absolutely fucking hated each other. So the fact you're kind of pointing to the camera going, I got a Japanese beer because we're talking about Russia. It's like if the Soviets understood, they fucking hated Japan at this point in the war. So, no, fair play. I've got myself a lovely Peroni because got nothing to do with Stalingrad. It's just a really nice beer.
And also it's good to just set out quickly, we might call Soviet Union Russia parts of this, but at this time in the war, 1942, during World War II, it is the Soviet Union, and they are the Soviets, not the Russians.
Yeah, that's a really good point to make, actually. I would have forgotten about that.
So let's dive in.
Yeah, let's dive in.
What do you know about Stalingrad?
Oh, God, me?
This is where we start.
Oh. Okay. I was about to say I don't want to spoil it, as if this wasn't 70 years ago or 80 years ago.
Spoilers.
But what I would say is that I believe, and I could be wrong on some of this stuff, I believe it is...
Let's shoot a shot, champ.
I believe it is by far, or by a decent amount, the bloodiest battle of World War II. It's certainly the most, at least in most people's opinions, I gather, certainly the most important battle of World War II, because it's essentially this huge turning point between Germany and the Axis winning and Soviet Union and the Allies coming back and winning World War II. That's the impression I get, that it was the turning point. I'm sure you can talk about that further. What else do I know? Like I said a second ago, I think that it is the bloodiest by a decent margin. The numbers, I could be wrong, but I believe they're 1 million on one side or the other. Is it more?
That is cute.
It's more.
What, you think 1 million people died?
Yeah, or casualties. Is it more?
Oh, should I say now?
Yeah, go on.
4 million people.
4 million
is the upper end of the predictions of how many people died in this one battle over the course of 3 months in the middle of fucking nowhere in Soviet Union. It's now known as Volgograd, big, large industrial city in southern Russia. like Joe said, a major battle in World War II. It's basically a turning point in the war where Germans go from winning the war to losing and, fucking badly after this war because they've just completely exhausted all their military might on this one battle. And guess what? It's a totally fucking irrelevant city. It has no strategic benefit. It's just... Oh, Jay,
Well,
you're about to say something.
I'm ready to go. This is something I feel like I know. Am I right in thinking that I'm sure there are a few small reasons, but am I right in thinking that one of the main reasons why this was considered such an important place for there to be such a big battle is because it's called Stalingrad, and Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, is like, they ain't fucking taking a city with my name on it. That's me. That's my city. So is that right?
Yeah, I was going to get into so Hitler and Stalin, they both see this as like a massive propaganda PR campaign, not just a military one. But like if Hitler can embarrass Stalin and take the city of Stalin, because Grad in Russian I guess is city. So they're dealing this like humiliating blow by taking Stalin itself. Like they didn't really know it existed until they looked at the maps and they were like, oh shit, there's a city with the name of Stalin on it. That's mine. I got to get that. So I'm just going to go back in time very quickly just to talk to you about the events prior to Stalingrad. Before that, and Joe, feel free to chip in where you want to.
Okay.
It's 1940. It's 1941 when Germany decided to invade the Soviet Union, and before that, they'd basically taken Austria, Czechoslovakia, France, Netherlands, Denmark, Belgium, Norway, Greece. Basically, the entire central and western mainland of Europe is now under Nazi German control. And also, importantly, they'd taken Poland. Yeah. And this is like the start of the relationship that Germany and Soviet Union have, because they're basically somewhat allies at this stage. They're not allies, but they're not enemies. So they're not fighting each other, and they have a pact with each other.
Yes.
And that was called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which is basically the two foreign ministers in Soviet Union and Germany, and they agreed to split Poland down the middle. So part of it would be belonging to Soviet Union, and part of it belonged to Germany.
Isn't that fucking crazy, by the way? That they've literally, like, these two nations that have just decided, hey, we don't like each other, but we both want the same thing.
A little bit of that Polish land.
Should we just split it up half and half? Would that be cool with you? And they just say, like, fuck it, Poland won't care, and then they just both just take half of Poland, and poor Poland.
And that's it. Like, all of Western Europe is German territory. There's nowhere kind of to look now besides the East. And Stalin, he sort of has an idea that Hitler wants to invade the Soviet Union, but for some reason he does nothing about it. He has like reserves nearby. He's being told constantly by Churchill and Roosevelt that Hitler's going to invade and he's coming. He just doesn't believe it. He doesn't really take action to combat that. And then we get to the 22nd of June 1941, and literally the last day. So this is the day of the invasion of the Soviet Union by the Germans, and he only believes it because literally a German border guard has run across and said to him, we're about to invade you. You've got to do something.
Really?
And he still doesn't believe it first, but then he's like, oh, okay, so you've got to do something.
What was the motivation of that border guard? Why did he do that? He had a Russian missus, and he just thought, let's give him a moment, or maybe his best mate. What
does go through the mind of a Nazi German
soldier? He had a
soldier?
Soviet mate, and he was like, I've got to warn him. I've got to warn him. What the fuck?
Maybe I don't know. Maybe.
Imagine like having your entire plan to invade a country. Like, keep it under wraps, guys. Keep it on. No, Heinrich, wait! Heinrich just runs over the border. Guys, they're coming. Heinrich, what the fuck?
And they don't believe him. They think it's like a sort of trap or something, or like a Trojan horse, but. This kind of like does send a message, and the next day, bang! They're driving hard across the border, tanks, spearheads, just blasting into the massive Soviet Union landscape, taking vast swathes of it very quickly. Because that's what the Germans like to do. They like something called Blitzkrieg, which is lightning war. It's basically where they get planes and tanks and just berserk across the environment. And
that's kind of that was kind of how the Germans had done so well up to this point. Was this concept of, if we just go as quick as possible and we push as much as possible with the biggest intensity, then no defense can actually keep up with us, at which point we'll be able to envelop them from the side, overwhelm, and then from there on, no one's got a chance. That was their idea, and to this point, until Russia, it had worked.
Been great, been sick, yeah. So they do that, and within about 5 months, they've covered thousands of kilometres, I think like 2,000 miles, literally. They've gone from the border in Poland all the way to Moscow. And that's how they do this. And they get to Moscow, and then, do you want to know what happens? It's December. There's your clue.
Oh, is it the cold?
Yes, the cold. Also known as
Russian winter.
Russian winter.
Oh, iconic. Everyone said, "Oh, don't forget about the Russian winter."
Yeah. So guess how cold it was, Joe.
Is this the coldest depth?
I think this is like the average coldness.
Oh, the
of like of
but
where they are.
what in the winter? Because
It got to like levels of this coldness, but it does strike me as this being like not a rare occurrence.
And this is in Moscow for this first battle before Stalingrad.
Yeah.
I'm gonna guess that what month? Oh no, you're just saying average.
But this is December.
Okay,
December.
December 19. Oh, what a cold month that was. I tell you what, I'm gonna go for
just thinking about it.
minus 15.
15. Minus 15.
Yeah,
cold. Joe, that is the coldest it's ever been in London.
Is it? It's actually.
Yeah.
Okay, minus 25.
It's minus 30. You're very close.
Oh.
The coldest it's ever been in England is minus 25. And
Ever in England.
Ever. And in Scotland, it's got to minus 27.
Yeah, of course. But this is the average.
The average temperature, probably minus 30 degrees.
I mean, even if that's a high estimate, like that would still be an average of minus 20 in like a warm day in the winter.
So the Germans are like super poorly equipped for this. They don't really have the right clothing or uniform. And they obviously have supply issues getting all the goods and the wool and stuff from Germany to the front line in Soviet Russia.
I guess that's kind of the con, right, of doing this lightning war, pushing as fast and far as you can.
Stretch the supply lines.
Is that you stretch your supply lines, and if you want to get it done as soon as possible, if someone loses a jacket because they're fighting...
leave it behind.
Yeah, it's like... But genuinely, I mean, obviously that's a very small example, but there will be examples where they're like, hold on, we just pushed an hour's worth of territory. I've left something an hour ago, but your general's going to go, no, we're still going. It's lightning.
They had the jacket Sturman Gruppen who brought the jackets up from the people that
Is that true? I thought you sounded so genuine.
It did sound good, didn't it?
That did sound good. I imagine that you lose stuff all the time. You run out of supplies essentially.
Whereas the Russians had the very iconic the Ushanka, which is like the fur-lined hats that everyone. You might have noticed them in sort of, you can Google them. The Vereshki.
Everyone knows the Russian
Ushanka.
fur line. Yeah, of course, because it's not just a war thing. You know, that's like a Russian icon symbol.
And they also had the Velenki, which were their felt-lined boots, and they were apparently like the top tier, like keeping it nice and warm.
That sounds nice.
So they got to the Battle of Moscow. They didn't take Moscow because here comes Georgy Zhukov, who is one of the famous commanders of the Soviet Union, who I'll get onto eventually. But he's decided to push back the Germans and repel them at Moscow. The Germans have lost 1 million men in their push through Russia, and it's the end of Barbarossa.
At this point?
Yeah.
Okay.
The Soviets have lost in the few millions. I think it's around 2.5 to 3 million casualties at this point in time. This is 5 months into the fighting. It's bloody as fuck.
Yeah, I mean the scale is so. When you say figures like 1 million, 3 million, you can't comprehend it. That's why there's that famous statistic, the famous quote rather, that I'm sure is probably just made up. That Stalin said that one death is a tragedy, but 1 million deaths is a statistic. That's like it couldn't be.
I've not heard that. But sounds good.
Apparently Stalin said it. I have a feeling that's just made up and it's part of it's part of law. But I do think that obviously it kind of exemplifies just how brutal the Eastern Front of World War II was compared to everything else. I mean, World War II is unbelievably bloody. There's a reason it was the bloodiest war in world history. But the Eastern Front is where that really shows. And
it's exceptionally cruel.
It's unbelievable.
Now, we get to the middle of 1942, and the Germans need to push again. They want to push back into the Soviet Union again. So they start what's called Fall Blau, which translates to Case Blue, which is the name of their new push into the Soviet Union. And this time they're going south, because obviously the Germans have thousands of tanks, and they need oil to keep those tanks going. They don't have many natural resources in Germany.
Right.
So they need the natural resources that the Soviets have. And typically in the southern Caucasus, which is a region near like Georgia and Azerbaijan today, close to where Stalingrad is, they have oil fields and lots of natural resources like steel and stuff like that, which is going to be vital for the German war machine.
So when we say that Stalingrad was, the main reason was because Stalin wanted to defend it because of the name, and Hitler wanted it because of the morale boost it would give to take Stalingrad. Surely part of it is also just the fact that Hitler wants to be able to take over that southern part of the Soviet Union and get those oil fields, essentially.
Yeah, but they don't need it. They don't need. They can. The city is just a point on the Volga River, and if they go around it, there are other points on the Volga River that they can, blockade or cross. That won't be as hard to, siege. So this is just totally irrelevant.
That
it
makes
might
a lot of
produce
sense.
like parts for some tanks and some like weapons, stuff like that. But it's basically you're gonna throw millions of men at it for little cost. But yeah, like you said, Hitler's looked at the maps on the way to the southern tip, and he's seen, what's this city? Stalingrad, and he's gone, we're taking it. That's ours.
Right. So essentially, the space that we're at this moment is that Hitler and the Nazis and the whole Axis movement have been pushing steadily through Russia, through the Soviet Union. They can't get everything they want straight away because it's incredibly bloody, and they're now prioritizing certain areas. They've prioritized Moscow and it didn't go that well. Now they're prioritizing going south to take these oil fields. That's essentially where we're at when this
That's
battle
where we
happens.
are. And then they come across Stalingrad, and now we get to the battle. The point in question, the Battle of Stalingrad.
I'm not gonna lie. I genuinely feel like a bit of like anxiety.
You're excited?
But it's just this is such a huge moment, and it's like you can't. I don't know that much about it. I genuinely don't, and I feel like I'm excited in a way to learn more, but I'm also kind of terrified because I just know that I'm gonna hear a lot of things that I really, really am gonna like regret listening to. Like this is gonna be tough, but let's go. Let's do it.
Okay. I put this in my notes. I have notes, like you did before. I've also brought notes today.
Show them to the camera. Let them see.
There's 13.
Look at that
There's
research.
13 pages here.
It's actually 13.
It's my baby.
Man, that's more than me.
It's like more than my dissertation.
It's not. Is it actually?
No, my dissertation was sick. It wasn't. It was shit. There's a few people that we should remember here. Obviously Hitler and Stalin, and then Zhukov, who, like I said before, is the General Field Marshal responsible for the Russian troops in the south of the Soviet Union. Then you got Friedrich Paulus, like I said, who is the German commander of the 6th Army Group. And you also have Choikov, who's basically charged in the defense of Stalingrad. So these are the three main players and the two big guys over them.
Okay.
Before they actually get to the city, Paulus' 6th Army, they're pushed hard. And they've encircled Stalingrad as much as they can.
But as in, like, the city's there, and they've got the entire army around the city.
Yeah, they basically have a big flank that's encircled them on the north side, and they pushed up pretty far on the south side, creating like a virtual encirclement, which in war terms is a fucking bad thing.
Yeah.
If you get encircled, you're going to have massive supply issues, you can't get new men in, you can't get old men out.
Also, just from a morale basis, if you know your enemy is all around you, how much, obviously you're gonna, if you think you are dead, whatever happens, you're going to fight tooth and nail, but you can't help but, like communication lines go. Like, how are you supposed to deliver messages? How are you supposed to deliver, this kind of, hey, we've got a chance here. Like, you can't help but feel if you're completely encircled by a huge army, how are you going to believe you're going to make it out?
You're in for the long haul. This is a terrible spot to be in. The only thing that can help you is someone breaks you out, but the Soviet Union don't really have the capacity for that at the moment. And then we get, before the actual invasion on the ground of the infantry into the city, you get the Luftwaffe, which is the German Air Force, and they've been like very important to date for the Germans. And they bomb the living fuck out of Stalingrad. Like they drop thousands of tons of bombs and basically completely reduce the city to rubble.
That was, I guess, when you asked me what are the things I know about Stalingrad, I actually didn't say this, but I guess one of the things that I am aware of is that there's not much footage, or at least not footage I've seen of Stalingrad, but what you would be able to see is anytime you search up any image of Stalingrad, any kind of, like, you watch a documentary and they show Stalingrad, it always just looks like a complete ghost town of rubble. Yeah. Like, it doesn't look like a city anymore. It literally just looks like this kind of enclave of brick on the floor, and then like a few buildings kind of just hovering by. It looks
absolutely
like hell. Genuinely, it looks like hell.
It's totally correct what you said. And the problem is, what that does is, when it doesn't reduce the building to the ground, it just basically creates fortified strong points. It basically just makes loads of cover, loads of great defenses which haven't been destroyed, little peak holes, entry points into buildings, like great defensive points. It's made pushing into the city much harder than it should have been. Because, like I said, every point is now heavily contested and heavily fortified, and it's a nightmare. So now the infantry go into the city, and this is where the battle starts. It's literally street by street, suburb by suburb, house by house, and in some cases, room by room combat.
Yeah.
Close quarters, literally hear them talking in the next room. This is what Choikov said, he's the Soviet Union commander at the time. He said, you should always be less than a grenade's throw away from your enemy. He wants them to be up close and personal, and that just makes for horrible, horrible combating conditions.
Yeah, I mean, just the idea of like fighting room to room is just terrifying. I mean, there's one thing fighting at all in general, but the idea of like being able to hear the enemy around you. I mean, just from from the average soldier's perspective, just imagine how terrifying. Knowing you have to go into the next room, knowing they are in there, and you've got to try and survive. It's just this. I can't imagine it.
Joe, how long do you think the average life expectancy was of a Soviet Union soldier at Stalingrad?
I mean, Jesus, for the amount of casualties that there are in that time, I would imagine less than a few weeks.
It's 24 hours is the average life. Apparently the reason why I fall with this is because a lot of the Russians had to get into the city through the Volga River because they were on the east bank and the city was encircled besides the Volga River. So they had to trek across it and get into Stalingrad by that. But when they're crossing the river, they got loads of heavy gear and they drown and they're sitting ducks for the German Air Force. So that's like the stumbling block itself. And then when you get into the city, you're fighting tooth and nail for rooms at a time. So like it's bloody fighting. Getting there first is horrible. And you have a day. A day.
Jesus Christ.
This is something in my research I found, and it is a guy called Wilhelm Hoffmann, who is a soldier for the German army, and he immaculately details his fighting in Stalingrad. It's one of the only diaries I could find of a German soldier. I couldn't find any of Russian soldiers.
Really?
Just quotes of it. The Russians have set light to the grain inside the elevator themselves. They are fighting desperately like wild beasts. Don't get themselves up, but come up close and then throw grenades. The lieutenant was killed yesterday, and now there is no company commander. The battalion is suffering heavy losses. The elevator is occupied not by men, but by devils that no flames or bullets can destroy. The Russians inside the elevator are condemned men. If all the buildings in Stalingrad defended like this, then none of our soldiers will get back to Germany. I had a letter from Elsa, who is his significant other, today. She's expecting me home when victory's won.
Bloody hell.
The Russians have stopped surrendering at all. If we take any prisoners, it's because they are hopelessly wounded and can't move by themselves. Stalingrad is hell.
Yeah.
Those who are merely wounded are lucky, as they will be sent home and celebrate victory with their families.
No soldier that gets into it is going to have any idea of what they're stepping into. Not the German side or the Russian side, or the Soviet side rather. They have no concept of what they're actually jumping into at this moment when they're sent into this war zone. They don't know. I mean, most of them have never, especially during the latter parts where they're having to bring in more reinforcements. So most of them have no idea what fighting is, and suddenly they're stepped into not just any battle, but one of the bloodiest, scariest, most gruesome.
Here's a question for you, Joe. What do you know about Order 227?
The second you said order, I was like, oh. And then you said 227. I was like, oh.
Order 66?
Yeah, I was thinking, like, is this like a Star Wars reference or something else? But no, I've literally got no absolute
Okay, so Order 227 is Stalin's order in middle of 1942.
Oh,
and
I do know it then. And let me jump in. Is this the order? I mean, to be fair, I wouldn't know that it is called this. Is this the order of basically no retreat? It is that.
That's the one.
It's the one where he's like, hey, anyone that's retreating, fuck off, and you go back to where you go, and you stay there, and you fight until you die.
You fight.
And if you do retreat, then you're dead.
Yeah.
You're dead, and that's
it.
That's on you, bruh. If you retreat, that's on you. You're dead. That's not on me. I'm Stalin. I'm the king. I do what the fuck I want. It's on you now. You stay where the fuck you are. That's basically what he's doing.
You're right. Yeah, Stalin's famous order number 227. It's called "Not a Step Back," and it's basically because I think there were rumors at the time within the Red Army, which is the Soviet Union's army, that Russia's big. We can keep going back. We can keep retreating. We'll just fight them when we get to like the mountains in the Urals or something. We don't have to fight them here. We can just cross the Volga River, then we can be defended by the river.
A pretty fair point.
Yeah, not a bad point. Yeah, I mean, it's horrible for the Germans to keep advancing. They're losing people to like sickness and plague and then cold weather every day. So like, it's not the worst idea, but like, it's not a great idea either. They're not going to win the war like that. It sets up what he calls Strafbat, which are penalty battalions, and they are basically this is fucking nuts, but like, anyone who deserts or retreats or runs backwards or is accused of cowardice or does any dishonourable sort of thing is put into a penalty battalion. Each division and each part of the army will have 3 battalions from now on. And they are basically fodder. They are meat for the engine. So they are put straight to the front lines. So if you've been a criminal or a coward, you're literally getting thrown straight to the front line in Stalingrad. Okay. And that is your penalty from order number 227.
That makes more sense, because to me, I thought that it was like, if you retreat, then you're just shot. And in reality, that actually would hurt.
They do have that. They have what they call Sagrat Ditinelni Otriadi.
Nice.
Did it sound like I was talking backwards?
A little bit.
They're called anti-retreat detachments. And they block your retreat, like you said. So if you retreat, they'll send the penal battalions in, they'll have these blocking detachments behind them, and if you come back, bang, you're shot.
I mean, but at the end of the day, they need as many men as they can have, because this is so brutal and so important in their eyes that they need every single Soviet that they can. So they don't want to kill you. If they can, get you to turn back round and now be the fodder for the rest of this battle, then they're going to do it. But if you then give even the slightest interpretation of, can I not? Then I assume they are going to shoot you. Can I? I actually don't fancy it.
The worst part is a lot of them actually don't even have guns. They're like they're so undersupplied and under-equipped that they're just kind of like sent in and are like, if someone next to you dies of a gun, pick it up and push forward. That's life for these guys. It's Ivan Gorin, who was a guy who was part of the battalion, wrote in his own words, "We thought it would be better than a prison camp. It was not. It was a death sentence." Which is, and you think about the Soviet prison camps, they weren't exactly nice places.
The Gulag.
They're not Butlins, are they?
Gulag, yes. No, you're right. The Gulag.
You love a Gulag, don't you?
A, great word. B, iconic as hell. But C, like, Jesus, you wouldn't want to be in one.
No, too right. So that's like the backdrop of what the Soviets are up against. Like they're being oppressed by Germany, who are coming in and killing them all. And then they're being told that they go back on the other side, they're getting shot that way. So their only choice is to fight. And fight rabid, like Wilhelm Hoffman suggests. And now we get into the fun part for the Red Army. Not the Germans, of course. This is where all hell breaks loose, and this is where it gets really fucked. The Soviets decide to counterattack in what's called Operation Uranus. Great planet. This is essentially because Paulus's 6th Army, which is 300,000 men, they're all literally inside Stalingrad. They're all trapped in there. At a peak, there are about 1 million men on either side in Stalingrad. But this entire army is in Stalingrad. And Georgy Zhukov, who I mentioned before, the Field Marshal of the Red Army, has devised this plan. It's basically to thrust through on both the northern and southern flanks and meet at a town called Kalach, which is nearby, near the Don River, about 50 miles away from Stalingrad.
So this isn't in the city. This is
outside the city. Yeah.
Right, okay.
Zhukov knows the Italians and the Romanians, who are like on the flanks, are weak. He says that they are, compared with the Germans, the troops and satellites, Italian and German and Romania, were not so well armed, less experienced, and less efficient, even in defence. So the Soviets amassed about 1.1 million men, and then, sometime in November, they basically both decided to push through, thrust through the German defences around Stalingrad. And then they met on the 23rd November at a Russian town called Kalach, like I said before. The Soviets then pushed forward, taking the Axis all the way back to the other side of the Don River, which is about 50 miles back, and that left Paulus and his 6th Army completely encircled in Stalingrad. It's a turn the tide. The Russians have completely pushed back the Germans. They've done the same thing the Germans did to them within a matter of weeks, and now things are looking really bad. I told you before about the encirclements, how bad they are. This is shit show.
So suddenly it's the Germans that are now completely encircled in the city, along with the Soviets that are also in there.
Yeah, there are a lot of Soviets at this point in time. There's millions and millions of reserves, and they have basically more or less unlimited manpower, unlike the Germans, who have had massive amounts of casualties in this war and don't have as many people as the Soviets do, obviously. So let's go back to Wilhelm.
Wilhelm,
who's in Stalingrad.
Yes. So has he been there from the beginning?
He's been there pretty much from the start. He's been there since early September, and he's now here.
Well, he's done well.
He's experienced. He's been there since the start, so I imagine that probably came a long way to allowing him to survive. But he's here. There are debates about the validity of Wilhelm's diary. Loads of historians have quoted him, and they believe it to be true, but some debate his existence because they say like the where he was in Stalingrad doesn't match up with the things he says. But it's generally appreciated that he is a real person.
Right.
November 29th, and this is after the encirclement on the 23rd. We are encircled. It was announced this morning the Führer had said he would try to rapidly break the encirclement. A couple of days later, on December 3rd, we are on hunger rations and waiting for the rescue the Führer promised. I send letters home, but there is no reply. December 7th, rations have been cut to such an extent that the soldiers are suffering terribly. issuing 1 loaf of stale bread for 5 men.
1 loaf of stale bread for 5 men.
That is the
for a day, I imagine.
That is the reality of life as an encircled, German army soldier. So, before I get into the detail, and it gets, like I said, worse as we go on. Take a quick breather and divert from Stalingrad just to reset our heads a little bit.
Okay.
But what do you think the other allies are up to? So you've obviously got the Russians, or Soviets, and you've got the Americans and the English.
Yes, us lot. Well, this is what, 1942? December 1942?
Take a wild guess.
Well, in 1942, we're not on the mainland. We're fighting in Africa.
Spot on.
Yeah.
Yep. The Brits were fighting in North Africa. We're pushing back the Germans and the Italians. We pushed them all the way back to Tunisia.
Let's go.
And the Americans. Let's go. Let's go.
Well, the Americans...
this has happened. They need your support.
The Americans will be in the Pacific, right? Because Japan would have bombed them in Pearl Harbor 1 year exactly in December 1941. So in December 1942, they will be in the process of taking back island after island in the South China Sea and, all that area.
You know your stuff.
Nice.
You're a smart man.
Let's go.
You're right. The Americans are in the Guadalcanal campaign, which is... This is a world war, so obviously other things are going on at the same time. This is not just in Stalingrad and Russia. This is happening all over the world, like the news suggests.
That's such a good point, because when we talk about a specific event, which is what we've done so far in this podcast, we are kind of nailing down a specific thing, but the kind of craziness, one of the many crazy things about World War II is the fact that it's happening everywhere. In Africa, there's battles. In some random tiny island in the middle of the Pacific, there's battles. There's bombing campaigns in Europe. The British and the Germans would be bombing each other.
Yep.
There would have been little civil wars happening in other countries that were deciding their own part. There's just crazy amounts of stuff happening worldwide.
But it's looking good for the Allies, so things are looking up. The Nazis might be defeated in the next few years. So let's go back to Stalingrad.
Let's hope, eh? Don't spoil it.
Let's go back to Wilhelm's diary for a second.
Okay.
And I know you love Wilhelm. You're thoroughly enjoying it.
Yeah, he seems like a nice lad.
He's stuck. Poor Wilhelm is stuck in Stalingrad. So, 3 questions are obsessing every soldier and officer. 1. When will the Russians stop firing and let us sleep in peace? 2. How are we going to fill our empty stomachs? And 3. When will Hitler take any decisive steps to free us from encirclement? And note that at this time, he stopped referring to Hitler as the Führer.
The Führer, yeah.
If you could, note the lack of faith or, the disillusion that a man has in the German army, it's when they stop calling Hitler Führer, because he's not a god anymore. He is a man who has ruined their lives.
That's such a good point, yeah. Everyone's so brainwashed into believing...
I read that on Reddit, by the way.
Oh, really? Everyone's so brainwashed into believing their own dictator until life gets shit, and then they realise, oh, I've been conned this entire time.
Yeah. They have heard about this encirclement, the breakout attempt that's going to happen from the German army. But here's what's actually happening, not on the ground and not what they've been told. So Paulus, like I said before, the German commander, he keeps asking Hitler to break out. And he keeps saying the position is getting less and less tenable. Soldiers literally have no food. They're dying of starvation and disease and cold. But Hitler keeps saying to Paulus, no, you can't break out. You need to stay. You need to defend Stalingrad. I'll add that there's no strategic benefit to keeping Stalingrad. It's totally fucking pointless. At this point, Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, who is another German commander, is also pleading with Hitler. He's a really well-known guy, by the way. He is one of the top dogs in the German army. And he's pleading with Hitler as well. He's saying, let them out. Get them out. They can break out probably right now because they're just about fit enough and have enough fighting force to do so. So I'll push him from the south, and they can push him from Stalingrad, and we'll meet up and we'll get them out. Hitler said no.
Unbelievable.
He's being told by Goering, who you might know who he is from the famous song about testicles and German leaders.
Oh, what, the one about one ball?
Yes, that's the one.
It's so funny. I was thinking, you said, you might know about Goering. I was like, is Goering that well known?
Yeah, Hitler. You know that one?
Yeah, but what's the Goering line?
Goering has 2 but very small. Himmler has something similar. And poor old Goebbels has no balls at all.
It's so funny. I don't think I've ever heard that full song. Or maybe I have, I've just blocked it out. God, is that actually how it goes?
It is, yeah.
Well, yeah.
That's probably sung by the English in 1940.
Goering, quickly on Goering. I mean, he's he's like this flamboyant guy, right?
Yeah.
Who is in charge of the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe. That's his role in the Nazi Party, and he's basically been there from the beginning.
Goering is one of Hitler's closest confidants, and he's whispering in Hitler's ear, like.
You assume it's in German.
Mein Führer, we can keep the Sixth Army supplied by air. It's not a problem. It's fine. The Luftwaffe will airdrop into Stalingrad, and they'll keep them supplied, and it'll all be fine. And Hitler takes that as fact. He's like, yeah, that won't be cool. Why would Goering lie to me? This is totally reasonable. But there's no aircraft to do so. There's really poor weather. There's logistical difficulties of actually dropping in supplies from the air to relieve and resupply the troops on board. It literally can't happen. It's not happening. And Hitler's like, yeah, this is totally, what a great thing to do.
I feel like that's like a classic yes man thing. It's like Goering just has his own delusions, but because he's Hitler's mate, he's got no clue. Clearly, he's
fucked up every battle.
Goering really.
Joe really hates
Goering.
Honestly,
all of the Nazi high command are absolute awful scum, but Goering just annoys me. Just he's so incompetent.
Goering does more. It's coming up.
Does he do more?
He does more. I'll go to it right now. I'll skip a bit ahead, but basically, Hitler draws up a relief attempt to get Manstein into Stalingrad. It's not supposed to relieve them. It's just supposed to get them supplies, which is not what they want and not what they can actually physically do. They can only do it if the Sixth Army are also breaking out at the same time.
Okay.
So it fails, obviously. And the Germans, they're fucked. They're just dying. And on the 30th of January, this is skipping ahead. I'm going to come back. I'm going to circle back around.
Sure.
But you get Goering and Goebbels on the radio, on the airwaves, to address the German army soldiers in Stalingrad. And you said you hate him, Joe, but he says he's on the radio to all German soldiers, telling them they're like the Spartans, who you might know from the film 300.
300, right?
They're defending against the mighty Persian Empire, the Battle of Thermopylae. So he's like commending them. He's like, well done, you. You're doing so well there with no food, and your mates are dying all around
just so tone deaf, man. This guy, I mean, I to be fair, if you're not in the battle, then I kind of get why he thinks that's a good idea in his small, closed-minded, stupid world. But Goering in this space is thinking, hey, I know what will morale boost them, is tell them that they're this epic 300 campaign that they're going to fight back and all this. But in reality, these German soldiers are going to hear it and go like, mate, shut the fuck up and come save us.
Look at this.
We need to be saved. Oh my God, what an idiot.
And then Goebbels was at the same time as telling them, the heroic struggle of our soldiers on the Volga should be a warning for everybody to do the utmost for the struggle for Germany's freedom and the future of our people, and thus in a wider sense, for the maintenance of our entire continent.
Oh, he was such a wanker as well. I mean, all of those high command, I mean, obviously for several reasons they're complete scum, but what idiots. They've got no idea. Of course the Germans were going to fail when they've got these clowns in charge, man. Idiots. I'm saying it as if I'm like disappointed they've lost. Of course I'm buzzing that they're fucking idiots. Like, thank God they were idiots. If they had a bit more, humility and understanding, then maybe they could have fought back against the Russians. But instead they've made a complete tits up of it, and now thankfully the Russians can get back in.
Let's go back now. So
yeah, please. Jesus. I'm angry.
So you might ask, Joe, why Paulus and Manstein didn't disobey orders and break out on their own and try to devise something to
that's a logical
against
question.
Hitler's orders. You said in the last episode, and for those of you who didn't listen to it, dictators are fucking crazy people. They are not right in their head.
Absolutely.
They're not logical.
Yeah.
And if you disobey their orders, they're very, very paranoid.
And angry.
And angry. Really, he's not calm, is he? He's not kind.
Adolf. Whew. My word. Have you seen Downfall? Das ist fine. Mein Führer.
What was the guy who
Steiner.
Steiner.
Mein Führer.
Yeah.
Steiner.
So if you disobey their orders, they'll probably kill you or chuck you in a concentration camp as a political prisoner. So this is on December the 18th, and we're back at Wilhelm's diary. The officers today told the soldiers to be prepared for action. General Manstein is approaching Stalingrad from the south with strong forces. This news has brought hope to the soldiers' hearts. God, let it be, is what he says. Beatles. Then December...
What the fuck? That's thrown me off so much. You're quoting this horrific tale of this German soldier in this horrific battle, and then you just go, Beatles. Mate,
So then we get to December 21st, 3 days later, and he said, this is Wilhelm. We are waiting for the order For some reason or other, it has been a long time coming. Can it be that this is not true about Manstein? This is worse than any torture. December 25th. The Russian radio has announced the defeat of Manstein. Ahead of us, either death or captivity.
It's so funny how the morale must have completely changed, because from the Germans' perspective, up to this point, and obviously Moscow had failed. Obviously Russia is now more of a tougher nut to crack than everything else they've done. But from a morality point of view,
fully believe.
until this point, you would assume that the German army and the Axis in general would have full belief in the Führer, but more importantly, just the cause and the ability to win everything. They would still believe,
Well, I mean, you
indisputably, that it would be fine. And then this happens, and your faith just gets completely taken away.
This is why I love the diary, because you can see at the beginning he's like, we're going to take it. This will be easy. We'll route them home. Victory's coming. If you get sent home, oh god, I'm lucky. I'm a bit jealous you've been sent home because it's shit here, but we're going to win, so it's fine. At least you get to celebrate it at home. To being like, oh, this is fucked. In his last entry, December 26th, and this is a month before the official surrender, he says, the horses have already been eaten. I would eat a cat. The soldiers look like corpses. They no longer take cover from Russian shells. They haven't the strength to walk, run away, and hide. A curse on this war. And that is the last entry in Wilhelm's diary.
Wow.
What's happening now? It's fucking tough. It's a horrible environment. The Sixth Army, in reality at this point, is completely buggered. They stay fighting until the 30th of January. It kind of speaks to the bravery and the ability of these guys, that they were literally defending positions and fighting against the Soviets with no ammo, no
freezing
food,
cold,
no clothes.
Also, as well, it's understated. You don't really it's hard to, because we don't understand battles, we don't understand wars with civilians, we don't get it. But another thing to take note of is the fact that when you fight on your own soil, you just have a natural sense of what you're doing. You know the area around you. If you've gone into a Russian city, you do not know the landscape. Obviously, you know the rubble around you. You can see it with your own eyes, but you don't understand where you are. You don't understand the people. You don't understand the things. You don't understand the road signs. You don't understand any of it. And so, your back is against the wall, literally, but also you have no concept of what to do, when to do it, because you're second guessing yourself, because you think they know everything so much better.
They come up behind you, they're in the same building as you, you've taken places, and then they're back in those places 2 minutes later. The entire Russian population had been basically oppressed by Germans in every province or state they'd occupied before Stalingrad, before Moscow. So they knew that they couldn't surrender. They had to fight, because if they weren't, the Germans would just kill them. They would kill them, they'd kill their families. It's basic extinction for the Russians if they don't win the war. Women signed up en masse to be both in the army and nurses, stuff like that. Snipers was a really, really kind of common profession for women and children as well, elderly. Everyone's fighting. The entire country has taken up arms against the Germans. Civilian militias are digging anti-tank trenches. They're strapping up and building barricades in the city. They're doing their best to slow down the German advance. What they're also doing is they're also embarking on a scorched earth policy.
Yes. And
that is basically where every meter that the Russian retreats in World War II, every couple of miles they step back, they burn or use or harvest or slaughter everything that can possibly be used by the German army. So they can't refresh their supply lines. They can't live off the land.
This is important for the beginning, because at the beginning, when the Germans attack, the Russians aren't expecting it. Like you said earlier, the Russians did not expect, or Stalin didn't expect for this to happen. So when the Blitzkrieg happens and the Axis push further and further forward, the Soviets have to figure out exactly what to do and how to do it. And it's this scorched earth policy of burning everything that they go past, so that
they can't use it.
They can't use it for
it's
themselves.
It's a great thing, because the Germans can't refresh the supply lines. They can't get trains and buses and trucks into Russia, because the roads probably being bombed, the bridges are probably being bombed on the way back. Yeah, there's a horrible difficulty of getting goods from central Germany or any of their colonies to the front line in Russia, thousands of miles away. It's insane. So this is working well for them. They're starving and beating on the Germans without even fighting them. So you're right. The entire nation at this point is taking up arms against them, which makes them a formidable foe for them. So I'll just come on now. We're kind of wrapping up what happens to the Battle of Stalingrad. And this is...
Well, there's still this big question. What happens to the German army?
Yeah, there is. Do you want to take a guess?
I know. This is one of the only things I do.
You do know.
Yeah.
Please.
Fuck, why have I said I know when I'm like second guessing myself? So I believe that eventually, finally, either Hitler gives the command or they decide on their own. I think it's Hitler gives the command, and they do retreat and they do make it, but it's so cold they have no provisions that essentially the Soviets just encircle them anyway. Even once they're coming out of the city, the whole army is essentially just completely taken over, and they capitulate, and suddenly the Soviets have like hundreds of thousands of German POWs, prisoners of war, just under their control.
No, mostly wrong. But Damn,
I thought I was onto it there.
Some correct parts. I think parts of the army did try and break out, and it was like really unsuccessful. But like units, not like en masse. And it wasn't an order given by Hitler. It was. Okay. So it gets to the 30th of January. And this is a month after Wilhelm wanted to eat a cat because he was so starving. And the Soviet...
A month after Wilhelm wants to eat a cat. Oh, God.
I think he said... I think he also says when he says that other soldiers also say that cats are tasty. So he's really thinking
that hungry.
So the Soviets have repeatedly offered Paulus's men surrender terms. And Paulus gets the terms, checks with Hitler. Hitler refuses. This happens 2 or 3 times. And it gets to the 30th of January, and Paulus is promoted by Hitler to Field Marshal. And this is really important because in German military history and Prussian military history, which is sort of what Germany was before it was Germany, they were like the strongest state of Germany, like the 1800s. This goes all the way back. Field marshals had never surrendered in German or Prussian military history. So he's basically saying to Paulus, kill yourself or keep fighting to the death.
Yeah.
And Paulus calls the bluff. He says, sure, why not? And surrenders.
Yeah. Literally
the next day, and this is the day after Goering and Goebbels have been on the radio. They've been saying, you guys are awesome, you're warriors, you're the German equivalent of Spartans. And he's like, fuck this, like, look at the state of this. Like, everyone's dying around us. My men have been massacred. End the fighting. So Paulus surrenders to the Red Army. From an initial group of 250,000 men, or almost 300,000 men, 91,000 exhausted, ill, and wounded soldiers remain. By the end of the battle and the end of the war, there are 6,000 survivors from that group of 300,000 men. And that's the end of the Battle of Stalingrad.
So wait, so I mean, I'm not going to do the maths, but as a percentage, I mean, 6,000 out of 300,000.
2%.
Yeah, you're looking at, you're right, it is 2%. You're looking at the tiniest amount, and the idea that you go into a war, go into a battle with 300,000 people alongside you, you'll know obviously several people that are in your unit, you'll know, you'll see the levels, the scale of what you're doing, because when you're walking and you go up a hill, you can see you have this huge array of an army behind you, and you go into this battle, and by the time that you finally reach Germany and can call yourself finally back at home, you're part of the 2% that has survived up to that point.
I kind of, in doing the research, asked myself at the end, why do the second episode on Stalingrad? And why is this what I think is important enough for us to talk about? And I think, for me, personally, there are 3 reasons, and you can chime in as you wish. But probably my most important, and this really, really sticks with me and strikes me, is that war is hell. It's fucking disgusting. It makes me really sad to hear about the conditions that the Soviet Union, the Red Army, and soldiers in general across World War II fought in. It just serves as a good reminder of what war is like. And as the world kind of edges closer to it lately, it feels like a good time to remind ourselves of the fact that it's just a horrible scenario.
Absolutely.
That should be avoided at literally every cost.
It's funny because it's like that is probably the best example you could give from World War II, which is the bloodiest war ever. And it is the bloodiest battle ever. And so it is a pretty good frame point to just showcase how disgustingly brutal it can be. And also, something, we sometimes trivialize the actions of certain people. And like we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, we have nothing but respect for the people that actually went through this struggle. We have to remember that even though Stalin is technically a brutal dictator, and even though Hitler's a brutal dictator, and even though, they are disgusting, awful men, the random soldier that's fighting in that battle is, usually either a teenager or maybe like 21, 22. They're just young men. They've done nothing wrong in their lives. And I'm talking about German and Soviets. You know, they've just been shoved into this war zone and are now having to fight. And, you know, there are obviously awful people on every side, even, you know, the Allies as well. We did some pretty despicable things. But for the average soldier, you know, we joke about Wilhelm and all these problems, and we say he feels like a friend after listening to him. Technically, he's a Nazi Germany soldier, but you know, you can't look at this type of stuff and imagine that he's a Nazi that would have contributed to the Holocaust. He's probably just a young German man that's been brought from the countryside or some town somewhere and brought to this fight to fight in the most hellscape scenario possible. And it's just this incredibly grim idea to come across, and you have to feel for these young men.
It's interesting when you see in like media of any sort of World War II, World War One, or any sort of battle, when they like kill someone or something, and they look in their pockets and they've got a picture of their family.
Yeah,
and, you know,
every single one of these soldiers had a mum, a dad,
a good reminder,
a partner, siblings. Some of them had children, and so you know it is a true reminder that, like, sure, we can always make jokes about the Nazi high command, we can always make jokes about Hitler and Stalin and stuff because we know a decent amount about these people and we know how despicable they were. But about the average German, or the average, you know, soldier that was fighting for the Soviets or for the British or for the Americans, at the end of the day, they are literally just young people. Not just men as well. There were plenty of women fighting, say, for the French resistance, for the Soviets. And these are just young people, mostly young, some old, but mostly young, just having to fight for their future and essentially for their survival. And that's why I think when you talk about a battle that's got so many, the numbers are so high, millions, and you kind of go like, you can't figure out what that is in your head. A million is, you can't think what is a million.
That's my third point. The scale of it, it's immense. The Red Army lost 2.6 million soldiers.
Soldiers, not civilians.
Soldiers during the battle.
Right.
2,068 soldiers died per day. And like I said, the average expectancy of a life was 24 hours.
2,600 per day.
Yeah, for their fodder. And interestingly, actually, in Ukraine today, the Russians still employ similar tactics of throwing prisoners and poorly equipped draftees into the front lines for fodder to eventually overwhelm defences, and it's not really worked terribly well there so far, but you know, a lot can change in war. And then anyway, my second point was that because the third was the scale. The second point is that for me, this was the most important part of World War II. I think this is the undeniable. There are a line of historians who suggest that the Germans could never have won this battle, and this wasn't the start of the end. It was like, you know, just a kind of side note on the way of it. Like the end was already coming for them by invading the Soviet Union in the first place, which is probably correct. But this is the moment where the Germans have exhausted their military might, their manpower. If they broke out the 300,000 soldiers, they might have been able to shore up the front line and keep the Soviets back for another year or two. Yeah. But they can't.
One thing that I find really interesting about World War II is how different cultures teach about the subject. So, like, in Britain, obviously we talk about the stuff that Britain is involved with, the Battle of Britain, D-Day, the you know, invasion of Germany and all this. America, something similar, and obviously talk about the Pacific because that's what you're involved with. When I was talking to my girlfriend who's Italian, she didn't know what D-Day was. Now, I'm sure lots of Italians might do, but in general, Italy are taught their own branch of history because Italy had its own big part to play in World War II.
Did they?
Mussolini and all that bullshit. I mean,
tell me, Joe, was it a good side
I'm
of
not
history?
jumping into Mussolini now, man. That's another fucking video. But I'll tell you that this is, you know, this. Everyone's taught their own thing, and I think one thing that is forgotten, or at least not understood, maybe particularly well in Western culture, in general, is just how insanely crucial the Soviet and German, you know, the Eastern Front as it's called, how incredibly crucial that is to shaping everything in the world we live in today. Because not only did the Soviets literally pretty much lose an entire generation of men and also, you know, civilians, women and children, but they felt, you know, this is generational trauma that they bring to them to the present day. And even though we might have been on the same side as allies, I think the Soviets certainly to this day just throughout history have just been brought up to believe, and to some credit, understand that they are the ones that beat the Nazis. They are the ones that have survived this horrific. You know, the Nazis and Hitler wanted to kill all the Jews. They also wanted to kill all the Bolshevik Russians. So, you know, for them, this was a war of survival. For them, this was
Holocaust.
literally their Holocaust. If they don't survive Stalingrad and the next few battles, then they might lose every single Russian. That was how they felt. And so that's kind of shaped this kind of stern, stoic Russian interpretation of the world that, you know, maybe everyone's against us and we have to fight tooth and nail because we already had to do it once and it was as brutal as it comes. And I think that's sometimes forgotten because in schools, we don't learn about Stalingrad. No. We don't learn about the Eastern Front at all, pretty much. No. You know, I'm not saying that it's a good thing or a bad thing that they have this point of view. I'm just saying if you want to have an insight, especially into current politics and things that's happening right now with Russia, you know, I'm not saying if anything's good or bad. I'm just saying this battle itself and the whole concept of Russia in World War II gives huge insight into their point of view from, you know, then until now. And there's simply no denying it. And the more you notice that, the more you realize why the Soviets and then the Russians believe and think the way they are. And like I say, there's no good or bad to it. That's just how things are. And you have to, I think, accept that.
So thank you for watching Pint-Sized History. This is our second episode on Stalingrad, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. I thoroughly enjoyed researching it, learning about it, learning things I didn't know before, and I'm sure, Joe, you enjoyed hearing about Wilhelm. And
honestly, I genuinely, I loved it. I think, especially because it was something that I knew a little bit about, but I didn't know all of it. I just think all of the Eastern Front in general is just so fascinating, and I'm glad I feel like I know a lot more about it. I must admit, I feel it's been intense. It's been a lot that we've talked about, and I'm like, my God, this is so
been
brutal.
A trip to Disneyland. Anyway, next time, Joe and I are going to be joined by a very familiar face. You might know him as Johnny Holloway from Traitors, who was a co-cast member of me on the show. And we're going to be talking to him about his time and experiences in Afghanistan.
Yes. Thank God we're getting away from World War II. We've done two things in World War II. I'm sure that there are people thinking, like, are you just World War II?
What's going to be next?
What's going on? I don't care.
Iwo Jima?
So I'm glad that we're getting away from it and talking about something maybe a bit more current. I'm so excited. I'm buzzing.
Cool. Thanks.
See ya. Bye-bye.